Hi everyone, welcome to the Movieception show. My name is Fariba, and today is the last day of 2023, and what better way to end off the year than to talk about basically my list of the top 10 movies of 2023, at least according to me. Now, of course, you're probably wondering, well, you haven't been really doing a lot of reviews, and I know that's something that I hope to be a part of my New Year's resolution going into 2024. But I will say that I've actually watched a lot of movies this past year. I want to say I watched at least more than 100 movies thanks to, streaming and, movie subscriptions. And, it's a lot. I mean, it's great having to get a lot of these movies, especially during this year where we've had things happen like, the strikes and, a lot of movies not performing well at the box office and so on and so forth. And yet that doesn't take away the fact that we've had quite a lot of great movies come out this year. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm not doing like a video format on talking about this movie. And that's actually because I've been recovering from a pretty bad virus, a pretty bad cold the last 2-3 weeks. You probably, are able to, notice that my voice is kind of a little different. And that's just because I'm still recovering from it. It's tough to talk here and there. So I thought, it'd probably be better just to keep it in a video, just to keep it in just kind of like an audio type of format for this video. But even then, with this being the last day of 2023, I really wanted to at least drop one final video, which is, again, my top 2023 movies of the year. So yeah, without further ado, let's get right down into that list. Before I get right down to that, of course, let me also mention a couple of my honorable mentions. There is The Color Purple, Megan, Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, Iron Claw, The Killer, Past Lives, Sisu, Priscilla, Wonka. These are the movies that, are great. I think they're worth mentioning. They just didn't quite make it to my top 10, but they were in some way or some form very enjoyable. So I really wanted to at least, mention them, by name, that, that they deserve some recognition. But let's get right down into my top 10. So starting off at number 10, I have Poor Things. I actually saw this literally yesterday in the morning, and I thought I wasn't even going to be able to find this film because it's so limited in terms of its release, and yet I was able to find one theater nearby me that was showing this film, and I'm glad I did because this is a very peculiar type of film, of course. This is Yorgos Lanthimos. I hope I'm saying his name right, but this is typically his type of films. He's done The Lobster, he's done The Favorite. His films are definitely in the more peculiar side because it's not just any sort of normal sort of storytelling that he does. There is something very quite, different about them, and this was definitely the case with Poor Things. The whole idea of Poor Things is that it has this loose inspiration of of Frankenstein's story, right? And that is that's basically upon what Emma Stone's character is about. But there's far more to this character than just a simple monster that's created or something that that Frankenstein himself has created in terms of experimenting on his monster. This is definitely a bit more of a story that is focused on the self-discovery of a young girl, right, played by Emma Stone, who has this different sort of lifestyle given to her as a result of this experiment by her creator. And now she goes into this world of exploration for the first time, knowing that, that she hasn't, for someone like her and her mentality, it's like, okay, well, she wants to go out into the world than just being cocooned in her own household by her creator. So, in terms of the whole story itself, it definitely takes a while just to get into, but the more you start to realize what the message is and what's really going upon this character of Bella, played by Emma Stone, the more I start to realize wow, this is actually a very interesting sort of story of a self-discovery for a young girl. And yeah, there is a lot of, moments in this film where it's very going deep into this kind of, sexual exploration that she undergoes, and it can be quite a lot. It's quite consistent throughout the beginning to the end of the movie. But you also start to see how, the more she understands the world, not just kind of the happy side to it, but the darkness of it, the more more that she starts to adapt to that lifestyle and, knowing what she knows and how she's learning from those lessons, she herself tries to somehow do better in that essence. So I really enjoyed it. I mean, this is something that I wasn't sure I was gonna like or not, just because, again, it is a very different kind of film. I mean, Emma Stone's performance is definitely out of this world. I mean, I can definitely see her as one of the front runners for Best Actress when we get to the Oscars. The cinematography is absolutely spectacular. The production design for this movie is just, I mean, it's phenomenal. Like, I mean, I could not stop, looking at the beauty of that production design. I mean, again, this is typical of, Yorgos Lanthimos' types of movies. So, but again, I actually really did enjoy this film. One I was really surprised that would actually end up in my top 10. I mean, again, might be surprising, might not be surprising, but again, because his types of films are quite of an acquired taste. And so not everyone will like it, but for this one, Poor Things, I really did like kind of the execution of how the character is characterized and her journey from the beginning to the end and realizing what the message is. At number 9, I have Air, which is directed by Ben Affleck. Now, this is a film that actually came out very early in the year. Like, I believe it was around March. And I mean, to this day, I have to say, Air is one of the films that is definitely a feel-good type of movie. Now, I believe when it comes to kind of the whole idea of it, I mean, it is technically a sports film, but this is not a movie where we get to see Michael Jordan, right? Like, I mean, I don't even think we actually get to see, like, an image of him until, like, probably at the end of the movie. But even that being the case, like, despite the fact that this is a movie about Michael Jordan, we don't actually really get to see much of it, as well as the fact that we don't actually see much of the basketball action in this movie. Much of this film is really focused on the branding of, Air Jordan, how it came to be, and the trials and tribulations that the people behind, Nike were able to get to, this really massive brand that has now taken over the world. And I have to say, like, I mean, this was definitely a great feel-good type of film. I mean, one of the reasons why this film really works is because of the cast. I mean, the ensemble cast for this is phenomenal. You have Matt Damon, you have Ben Affleck, you have Jason Bateman, Viola Davis. I mean, these are some world-class performances you have in front of you, just really kind of giving the essence of what the characters are going through. And I have to say, like, I think that, there's just a lot of things on this film that you just, like, thinking, well, this film could go anywhere in terms of its tone. And it definitely kind of, and even then, like, regardless of where it could have kind of shifted in terms of its drama, it definitely had this essence of, like, keeping you building the suspense even though we already know what's going to happen. And yet it's like you understand a lot of what's going on, the details of it, and the performances of the people behind this film. And I mean, I have to say, like, this is a film that I just was like, I felt giddy. Like, I was smiling most of the time, and I had a lot. And I have to say, one of the best parts of the film, of course, is the ending, just having that sigh of relief, that, that whole kind of redemption, because this was kind of a big part for Nike, because because they explained in this film, of course, that, for Nike, that they were really struggling at this point, especially in the basketball division, to kind of get any sort of, I guess you can say, interest in sports, and just getting their merchandise and branding to really evolve in any way, and just to see kind of that redemption by the end of the film and how they really succeed in everything that they've been trying to build up to. And again, it's just a really interesting story, one that again kept me really gripped in terms of the story and the characters, and just, again, it's a really fun film. And there were also some really chuckly moments here and there. I mean, this is a film that does kind of, run into, like, not just being a sports film, but also being a comedy, just because of what's happening behind the scenes. But again, at the end of the day, I really did enjoy Air. This was one of the films that, I mean, it had me smiling. I mean, it definitely is a very feel-good film, and I think even as we get to the end of 2023, Air is definitely one of the films that I have to say it still, keeps me in my mind, knowing that, wow, this was a really nice experience I had watching in theater. So at number 9, we do have Air. At number 8, I have John Wick Chapter 4. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, this was a really awesome, fun-filled, action-packed movie. I mean, when it comes to John Wick, I don't think you can really go wrong with how you can really kind of go upon trying to execute this film. I mean, there is definitely that big challenge of how can you one up each movie. And I have to say, like, it's really spectacular to see how John Wick's franchise has really evolved, because I think each and every movie has gotten better and better, but there's no doubt that Chapter 4 is definitely its best. I mean, this is a film that really truly sets itself as a finale for John Wick's story, and doing so in a way that is not just, being the end, but doing so in a bang. And this film, I mean, I have to say, there's so many things that could have gone wrong, but I mean, it wasn't. I have to say, like, the action sequences in the film is absolutely spectacular. I mean, you have these sequences in that, underground, the underground party. Then you have some of the samurai moments with Donnie Yen. Then you have the ending, of course. You have the standoff. There's so many great moments in this movie. I mean, this is a movie that is the longest John Wick film. I think it was cutting at 2 hours and 40 minutes. I mean, the length could have been a big issue for this film, but I don't think that ever became too much of a big issue for me. I was definitely glued to watching this movie, seeing kind of where John Wick's, what seemed to kind of be the final chapter for his story, and how it really kind of, builds up to those moments. I have to say, even, and not just seeing how John Wick kind of finally gets, to acceptance of his faith, and finally getting his freedom for once, like, really fighting for his freedom, but also seeing some of the other characters involved who are very important to this. I think, again, one would be Donnie Yen's character. I mean, I have to say, like, his addition to this film was very crucial, and it really added this emotional aspect to why his character is here, as well as his connection to John Wick, and not let alone the fact that he is just as, physically, combative, hand-to-hand combat sort of style as John Wick is, and in a much different style, of course. But just to see, like, again, having all this, ensemble cast come in, join in to, help John Wick in his pursuits. I have to say, this was definitely a fun film, but also emotional, because as you get to the end of the film, like, it does seem as though this is the last chapter for John Wick. We'll see about that. I mean, again, there's been some talks about whether or not there could be a 5. I mean, again, it depends on what director and Keanu Reeves want to do, but I have to say, like, I think that John Wick Chapter 4 was definitely one of the most action-packed movies this year. I think it is the most action-packed movie that I've enjoyed this year. I think it's the one that has definitely felt like it was the most promising and the most redeeming one of them all. And I have to say, I think because of that, I mean, again, this could have gone wrong in any way, but it definitely did everything, and definitely elevated in so many ways, and doing so in a way that, because of this technically kind of feeling as if it is a final chapter, that they did so in a bang. So that's why it ends up at number 8 right there. At number 7, I have Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Now, I know not a lot of people have been talking about this movie. I mean, this is definitely, I would say, one of the most under the radar movies if you are not consistently watching movies in theaters. This is actually one of, like, I'll say this. So this is, of course, a coming of age story about a young girl who is starting to understand kind of the challenges of what it's like to be growing up. And for me, when it comes to coming of age stories, they can be hit or miss for me. Just because, again, it is quite a specific genre that has a, target audience. It's not a very big target audience, and yet it's like, okay, well, how will I enjoy this movie? And yet I have to say, this was definitely one of the most surprising ones where I had to put in this list. Like, it's the one that I felt I was the most amused by, because of how it really executes its storytelling and understanding what is kind of this conflict going on with this character, Margaret. Now, the story does dive into a lot of serious subject matters, such as, religion, religious clashes, coming of age, of course, school peer pressure, puberty. Like, there's a lot of big things that this movie does, kind of try to tackle. And it's like, okay, well, how can you, how can you bring upon all these big stories, how all these big subject matters, and try to make into a comedy, let alone a coming of age story? And I think at the end of the day, it works really well. I mean, this is a film that, despite the subject matters that it does tackle, it does so in a way that there is that comedy aspect to it, where we see where Margaret's going through kind of the struggles that she has to kind of figure out, like, okay, well, I need these answers. I have all these questions, but why am I feeling so conflicted? And it does, and it's really resonating because, I mean, this is what we feel like. Like, I mean, the more I was watching this film, I felt like, wow, this is exactly how a lot of us felt when we were teenagers, like we were in Margaret's positions before, and we know what it's like to be confused and questioning things, as you start to understand that, the world is not, daisies and roses, right? So for this one, it was just like, wow, I mean, it was incredible just to see Margaret's journey to understand, like, whether or not she wants to, follow a specific religion, what it's like to, undergo in her whole journey to, puberty. And not just that, but I really do enjoy the aspects of how she tries to have her whole, mother-daughter relationship, because that was also pretty key in this film. I mean, this film does star Rachel McAdams and I believe Katie Bates. I have to say, Katie Bates is spectacular in this movie. I think I hope that when we get into Oscar season that she is able to somehow squeeze into a possible Best Supporting Actress nomination. But I have to say, overall, this is a very enjoyable comedy that, I hope a lot of people are able to, are able to take some time to check out, just because, again, even though it is a coming of age story, it is one that is very heartwarming, very tender, very amusing. I mean, I was having quite a blast watching this movie in theaters. I was laughing a lot. So, and because of that, because of, considering the fact that this is a movie that I typically would not really watch, let alone enjoy, I definitely did enjoy this film. So that's why it's at number 7. At number 6, I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, usually there would be like, at least once a year, or at least, every year, I'll typically have like maybe 1 or 2 Marvel movies that I would hopefully make into the list. I mean, this was a year that, it probably would have been the first year that I wouldn't have had listed a Marvel movie had it not been for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I mean, this one I was like, I knew it had to be a must top 10 somewhere. And there's a lot of reasons why. I've actually done a review for this, and you guys who have probably watched it would know how much I, thoroughly was, how I thoroughly felt about this movie. So, I mean, as I said before in that review, like, Guardians of the Galaxy, like, it's definitely kind of had its highs and had its lows. I mean, the first one is great. The second one was not as great, but the third one definitely hit me in ways that I thought I would have imagined. As I said before, this is a movie that really broke me, in ways I would never have imagined. I remember still in theaters, like, I still have memories in theaters where I'm literally bawling because I'm just like, wow, like, I don't know how to contain myself. One of the greatest things about this film, of course, is just this whole idea of the theme of friendship, because that's what this movie is basically about, friendship. And we all knew that this was going to be kind of the end of the road for the Guardians of the Galaxy team. This is something that was being teased by James Gunn himself and the cast, that this was going to be the end of the road for the team. As to how they're going to execute that was going to be the biggest question mark. But once we finally got this film, I mean, this was definitely one that, really truly showed the depths of what it's like what friendship is, and the whole idea of it and the importance of it. And I think, again, one of the best ways that this film has really kind of executed this is through the origin story of who Rocket Raccoon is. I mean, his story was really the star of it all. I mean, he is what really pulls this movie through, and which is this story of Rocket Raccoon, kind of his tragedy, what his tragic story has led to, kind of this friendship, kind of like, what basically set the trajectory of his whole life to essentially become a guardian himself and to become, friends, or at least find the friends that, you know, he probably wouldn't have thought he would have been able to find had it not been for other things. And Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I mean, this film, again, it could have gone any way. I mean, a lot of times some films are not able to land on the ending and others do. And this is definitely the one that, you know, despite the fact that I've had my whole criticisms about Volume 2, Volume 3 really does redeem a lot of the mistakes that have happened in some of the other parts of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And I have to say, like, yeah, this is not the most perfect film, of course. That's not to say that this is a perfect MCU movie, or that this is one of the best MCU movies I've seen. That's not to say that. But again, this is a film that, you know, given what it was and how it was able to really toy with my emotions in ways that I've never felt. Like, again, I've never, like, I was literally like crying. Like, I mean, I can't even explain how much I was crying watching this movie. Usually whenever I cry watching a movie, they're usually automatic top 10 somehow. This one definitely deserves to be in the top 10 for sure. I mean, it's at number 6, but I have to say, I think that this was definitely a very emotional journey that I've never would have imagined. I mean, now just looking at it, I'm just kind of like wondering, wishing that I would have taken a bit more time just to invest on the Guardians a little bit more if we had that chance. I mean, we'll see kind of what's going to happen beyond, you know, whether or not, you know, we'll see any of these characters again in the future. But regardless of that, I think that this is definitely one of the best post-Endgame movies that we've had. Again, because of James Gunn. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what it's going to be like. I mean, James Gunn's now in DC. It's going to be in the DC team, so we're not going to see him anytime in the Marvel era anytime soon. But I have to say, I think that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 definitely deserves to be in the top 10. It's definitely one that, you know, it's definitely emotional. It shows the true essence of friendship. It has a very heartwarming, very tender ending that, you know, it could have gone with the whole, you know, someone could have died, but it didn't. But it definitely leaves you smiling knowing that this is what, you know, happened to the team and they're all moving on and they all have an understanding. And that's why I was like, you know, this has to be in my top, at least in my top 10, and definitely lands on number 6 right there. At number 5, I have Godzilla -1. Now, I know I haven't done a review on this, and I don't typically do a lot of reviews on international movies. I'm going to try and do a bit more of that going into 2024. I'm going to try and see if I can actually put a review up for Donkey, Shah Rukh Khan's like latest Indian movie, but let's talk about Godzilla -1 because this is a Japanese Toho movie. And this is definitely separate from the Monsterverse. So this movie has no relation to the Monsterverse, but there's been a lot of talk about Godzilla -1. There have been a lot of trailers, reviews. A lot of people have been talking about it. And I finally got the chance to go see this about a couple of weeks ago. I think like about back in early December. And I have to say Godzilla -1 is definitely one of the best kaiju movies I've seen in a long, long time. And there's a lot of reasons to this. So one of the things that this movie really benefits from that the Monsterverse movie usually struggles with is the whole human perspective. This is a huge struggle with the Monsterverse. Like, I mean, that's one of the reasons why it's really tough to get through most of the Monsterverse movies in that franchise, because the human aspect is not as profound. It's not as, you know, resonating. But in this one, it definitely is one that is basically kind of the glue to this movie. Now, in this one, they really do show Godzilla as a much, you know, of a villainous type. So it's not like, you know, the Monsterverse where he's basically like a superhero. This one, they do show him as the antagonist, how he's the one who's being a pretty big burden to those in Japan. And in this film, I have to say, like, I mean, the way that they really showcase this, you know, humanistic story is unlike anything I've seen before. Of course, this is like post World War II, so we see the lives of the characters here. I can't even remember their names. Like, I mean, it's really tough to pronounce their names, but with the Japanese characters that we do see in this film, you do, like, I think what's really interesting is that despite the tragedies, despite the wreckage and the demise that they had gone through as a result of, you know, World War II, and, you know, with this incoming kaiju, is that there's still this essence of how these characters have this togetherness. And we do see this with the male character here, where he does have his reservation, whether or not, he wants this family or what or not. The fact that he does kind of has his own, sort of showdown with the kaiju, because he's encountered so many times. Seeing his journey throughout from the beginning to the end, and seeing how he starts to really accept the whole idea of having a family and why family is important to him, and how the kaiju's integrate into this. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, there are moments where you do sort of get emotional with what happens here and there. The performances are great. The kaiju, I mean, just to see the kaiju moments, those are spectacular. Although I will say there are a couple of places where I'll maybe nick a few, technical points. There's like one thing I will say is that when we see Godzilla, or how they call it, Gojira, when you do see Godzilla in his his full form, his mini I have to say his mini hands they're so stiff, and they're just kind of not really moving. That was maybe the only thing that was distracting me a little bit. I was just like, oh my god, those, he's not even able to move his hands. But with that, aside from that being kind of the only nitpicky thing that I'll probably mention, I mean, I have to say the way that they really show his moments are spectacular, pretty incredible. The way that he's able to blast his radioactive powers. I mean, those were some really chilling moments to watch in this movie. The ending sequence where they're basically kind of, I wouldn't say an Avengers moment, but definitely it's all men come together and let's go and defeat this monster that needs to be stopped. I mean, lots of great moments, lots of very genuine storytelling, very heartwarming, definitely a different type of storytelling that, I hope that, some of the MonsterVerse movies are able to learn from. But I have to say, this is definitely the one that truly is one of the best I've seen this year, just because of how different it is, how it really kind of elevates its storytelling from what we've seen in past Godzilla movies, and how we're seeing it now. And again, just how they're able to show this imagery of who Godzilla is. I mean, I have to say, you got to give a lot of applause to the director, the maker, the team. I mean, this is one of the best movies I've seen this year, let alone one of the best Godzilla movies I've seen ever. So it definitely deserves number 5 right here. I mean, hopefully it'll definitely get some Oscar, recognition somehow. I don't think it got picked for Japan's international list, so it's not going to be in the best foreign or best international category, sadly, but hopefully there are other ways that this movie will get some recognition, because this is totally one of the best ones I've seen this year so far. At number 4, I have The Holdovers. Now, again, this is one I would say that is definitely one of the most under the radar film. I would say it's one of the most underrated films. I wouldn't say it's one of the most underrated films, because it is one of the most highest rated films this year, but it is definitely one of the most under the radar movies, because I don't think a lot of people have seen The Holdovers. But I had the chance to go see this about a couple of months ago, because I've been hearing so many great things about it. And thankfully enough, my theater was one of the few that were actually showing this movie. And I have to say, I was absolutely gobsmacked, awed by this film. I've never felt genuinely, happy watching a movie like this. I mean, this is definitely turning into a feel-good type of movie, seeing how, there's this, I will say this, I mean, this is a movie that does trend into the comedy aspect, because of the fact that it dives into this whole, conflict between a professor and a student. The whole idea is that, these are the holdovers who, are not able to go back home to celebrate for the holidays, and therefore they have to stay and remain at I believe in this case, kind of the boarding school or the university or the academy or something like that, or a school for boys or something. But this was definitely a very generally nice, feel-good movie that we get to see of this professor. I mean, he is someone who is very strict, who has a particular type of, he's very obedient. He wants, some sort of, I guess you can say, order in his room. He's not he's not someone who you want to mess with. It's played by Paul Giamatti, of course, but yet even with this type of character and his no nonsense sort of personality, seeing how he is able to, how his relationship grows with this character, this young boy probably like 17 or 18 years old, but this young boy who can be a troublemaker at times. I mean, they make this very clear about this character that he's a troublemaker, but it's not something that, he was just born out of, right? I mean, there's some reasons to it, and this journey between these two characters is very interesting, it's very amusing. It can be very tender as well. And the more we get to see how their relationship evolves and grows, the more that we get to really understand who these characters are and realize that, oh, these characters that we're seeing here are not necessarily who they really are, but there's something deeper about them. And I have to say, like, it was definitely one that really kind of keeps your eye open, realizing that, oh wow, this is how people can be, and how once start to really understand humanity and how human perspective is in general, the more that you really start to understand that, wow, we can't judge people by their cover, right? I mean, this is basically the whole aspect of it. And it's not just, Paul Giamatti, young boy, but there's also the cafeteria lady that is in this film, played by, I can't remember her name, but I can't remember her name, the actor's name. She was actually, I believe, in Only Murders in the Building, but she's absolutely exceptional in this film, of course. I think hearing her story as well is one that's also very tragic. I mean, this film is hilarious. This film is fun. It's very tender. It's tragic in some ways as well when you start to understand all these characters. I have to say, this is one that is really amplified by its performance as well. Again, Paul Giamatti. And I can't remember the actress's name here, but she's also very exceptional. I do think going into the Oscars, Paul Giamatti is going to get one of the final Best Actor nomination spots. There's no, like, I would be surprised if he doesn't get that final spot. I think if there's, like, and I'll talk about this with Oppenheimer, or I'll talk more about this when we get to, talking about Oscars and doing predictions, all that. I'll talk more about that later. But if there's anybody who is going to be a major challenge to Cillian Murphy, is going to be Paul Giamatti. I mean, his performance is absolutely spectacular in this movie. He deserves some recognition for it. I also do hope, again, I can't remember the actress's name right now. I mean, it could be Davine Joy Randolph, I want to say. Maybe. I'm not sure, but her performance here was absolutely exceptional as well. Again, you really feel for her character and what she's going through in this movie just because of what happened to her son. I mean, everyone in this movie was absolutely spectacular. The storytelling is really tender and heartwarming. I have to say, like, I mean, if you have not seen The Holdovers, I do recommend it. I do believe it's on streaming now. I think Peacock might be the streaming service for it. So if you've not already seen it, I totally recommend it. It's a really fun, tender, tragic movie that really toys with your emotions. And again, it gives you kind of a better understanding of human behavior and how people are, and realizing that you can't judge people so early on just because of just because of how they behave in other environments. So again, definitely a really nice movie to watch. This was definitely one I would say that deserves to be in my top 5. I put it at my top 4. I put it as my number 4 right here. Now, getting down to my top 3. So at number 3, I have Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. I mean, this one is, a no-brainer. I mean, when it comes to the Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse movies, they're definitely top-notch for a reason. I had a blast watching Into the Spider-Verse. That was a film that, it had some really great moments, but also some really emotionally resonating scenes as well. I mean, the beginning sequences with, the original Peter Parker, and then the latter parts of the movies, and this continues on into Across the Spider-Verse. I mean, this was definitely one that really starts to expand on the scope far more than Into the Spider-Verse, because we start to really kind of dive into the much bigger aspects of the Spider-Verse and how it works. We start to meet some other Spiderlings, like, we meet the Indian version of Spider-Man, we meet Miguel O'Hara, we get to see a much better idea of who his character is. I mean, we saw him being teased in one of the post-credit scenes in Into the Spider-Verse, and now we get to see him here as well. And this is a very interesting film because we know for a fact that when it comes to Spider-Man, he is someone who is your typical superhero, right? I mean, he is the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man who wants to, make sure that he can protect everyone at all costs. I mean, there is no if or buts or anything like that. And yet, this is a film that really starts to challenge that notion of who Spider-Man can be. Like, is he willing to be the type of person who will who would go to the extent of sacrificing the people around him and men having to save the multiverse, right? I mean, this is definitely going into some really deep territories of whether or not, you know, like, you have to make a decision. Do you want to save? Like, this is going to, like, that whole, like, you know, mentality of, are you willing to save, you know, are you willing to go through and save this one person if it means having to sacrifice millions of people? Or are you going to let this person die to save those 10 million people, right? Like, this is really going to the depths of this whole, you know, confusing, very, you know, this whole morality of, okay, what will be the best choice if it means, you know, humanity's at stake, right? And we see this sort of dilemma that Miles Morales has to go through, knowing that, you know, this is how life is. We start to learn a little bit more of canon events and how this has an influence on whether or not this would protect or save a, you know, an actual universe, or this would actually put or this is going to cause a chain reaction to a universe that could actually wipe them out. We've learned a little bit about this, of course, in the MCU with the excursion and everything like that, but this one definitely does. But what makes this one better than what we've seen so far with the multiverse and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that this one definitely goes to the depths of it all. I think this is one where, like, it kind of fixes the issues of understanding how to play out the whole multiverse concept that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has really struggled with. I mean, even to this day, like, when we look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I'm still questioning how the multiverse works, as we never really got to the depths or the actual rules of it all. Whereas Across the Spiderverse does a really great job of diving deep into that concept and still doing so in a way that it still integrates Morales' story and how this would affect him. We see this in this movie, of course, how this is going to be very critical to his storytelling. I mean, the way that this movie ends on a cliffhanger, of course, like, we don't know what's going to happen, whether or not, you know, whether or not he has to let his father go, or he's going to try at his expense to go and try and save him if it means that it could put his universe at risk. I mean, we've seen a lot of different ways that this movie could be playing out into, like, setting up the following movie, but in this sense, right, Across the Spider-Verse, it does a really spectacular job of showing kind of this darkness of what Spider-Man has to go through. We don't get a conclusion to it as well. And not just that, we also get to see a little bit more of Gwen Stacy's story in this one as well. Like, we saw her a little bit in Into the Spider-Verse. This one, she definitely has a much elevated role, and she's very crucial in this one as well, because, again, it's showing this contrast of what these different Spider-Lings have gone through, how their lives are impacted, and how that would have an impact on the universe itself. Again, this is one that really plays into the concepts very, very well, and does so in the way that the characterizations and the character development is so well done that, I mean, again, this is definitely the best anime movie I've seen so far this year, without a doubt. I don't even think that any of the Disney ones have really been, I mean, I guess Elemental is one of the better ones, but again, the best animated movies I've seen so far is Across the Spider-Verse, one that has really taken a lot of risk in its whole storytelling. And again, this whole big idea of knowing and understanding how the multiverse works. And the makers here have done such a spectacular job of really pulling off, just figuring out the pieces and puzzles for it. And so without a doubt, it lands at number 3 here for me. It's one of the best movies I've seen this year, without a doubt. It's a lot, as everyone has been calling it, it's basically the Empire Strikes Back of, you know, Spider-Verse. I mean, this definitely does feel like it. So without a doubt, one of the best movies I've seen this year so far. I feel like it's definitely a clear winner going to Oscars when it comes to, like, the best animated feature. We'll see, like, what else gets nominated, but without a doubt, one of the best I've seen so far this year. Now at number 2, I have Barbie. This one shouldn't really come as a surprise because Barbie was definitely the one I had the most fun with in terms of how it really plays out with everything. Now, again, this is a movie that could have gone in so many different ways. It could have been so bad. It could have been so good. And this one definitely went into the very good route. I mean, Greta Gerwig, I believe this is one of her biggest movies so far. I mean, she has done some really incredible films in the past. She's done Lady Bird. She's done Little Woman. I believe before this film, Little Woman was probably my favorite movie from her, but Barbie. I mean, wow, the way that she was able to really conceptualize the idea of Barbie and how, considering the fact that, again, Barbie is a very renowned figure in our history. I mean, she is a doll that at least one of us have played, at one point in our lives when we were kids. I've definitely played Barbies when I was a kid. Not anymore, of course, but just to see how, how they can integrate the story of Barbie and understand and trying to find the deeper meaning of what her as an icon is to a lot of young girls and what this feels for her. Right? I mean, this is a film that really dives deep into a lot of some pretty personal things. I mean, you have feminism, you have, existential crisis, you have, there's toxic masculinity. I mean, this film plays on a lot of different things that, and patriarchy, of course. But yeah, this film plays on a lot of different things that, it could have gone wrong, but this film did it so right. And did it in a way that it still is able to incorporate all these amusing, fun moments in this film. I mean, just to see again how Barbie's able to evolve and grow and find her self-discovery and finally finding what is, her true life and realizing that she couldn't be typical Barbie anymore, that she wants to move on from that life and accept that. And then not just that, but then seeing Ken's side of the story, right? I feel like what a lot of people miss out on this movie is that this movie is not just about a movie for Barbie, but it's also about Ken and how he needs to find his acceptance and how he needs to be, able to be happy for himself as well, right? I mean, he can't just, just because what's happening in the real world, like it's going to work in Barbie land or something, or that's going to win over Barbie, right? I mean, it's really incredible how we get to see the storytelling for both these characters and how they're able to move forward and move on. And again, tackling all these big topics like patriarchy, feminism, and self-discovery. I mean, this is a film that I had so much fun with. Definitely one with lots of great storytelling, lots of great character development. The world building is spectacular. I mean, the production's design here, I mean, it's out of this world. And let alone the music is great. I mean, I still keep on, like I'm telling you, I'm just Ken. It's still a bop in my head to this day. So, without a doubt, this is a movie that I feel like it's definitely going to be very evergreen moving forward. It's going to definitely kind of have this classic mindset as we get more and more, going into the following years. Like, I feel like this is a movie that's definitely going to be in the books for a long time for a big reason. This is definitely a big accomplishment for Greta Gerwig and really kind of breaking through this idea of how to pull through a character, knowing again just this whole history behind it and still making so that's really original and storytelling and one that's really meaningful while still being super fun. I mean, this is a film that you can definitely tell everyone's having so much fun with it. Ryan Gosling as Ken, I mean, absolutely stand out. I've mentioned this in my review before. He is the highlight of this movie. Without a doubt, he's going to be one of the frontrunners going into Oscar season for Best Supporting Actor. I mean, it's going to be between him and Robert Downey Jr. I'll talk more about this again when we go and talk about Oscar stuff. But again, one of the best movies I've seen so far. One I feel like I'm still watching again. I'm still rewatching some of the scenes to this day. I mean, this is a film that's going to be an icon very soon in the futures. And I mean, again, it makes sense. I have to say. So yeah, really deserving a number 2 spot right here. And at number 1, I have Oppenheimer. This one shouldn't really come as a surprise, although again, I didn't really do a review on this movie because I never got the chance to, but here it is. Oppenheimer is my number 1 movie. And there's a lot of reasons to this. And I have to say, I think, as you all know, I'm a huge Christopher Nolan fan. I usually go and watch his movies on the very first night. And I mean, he is a particular type of filmmaker who is really all about the details and really kind of looking at the depths of not just the character and storytelling, but everything around it. Like, I mean, he's very specific about his technical, abilities. He's very specific about the storytelling, specific about the performances, he's specific about his characters. He's very, very specific. And I mean, he's had so many amazing movies in the past. I mean, to this day, Inception is one of my top 5 movies of all time. For a reason, because of how complex his storytellings can be. And this is definitely the one that, is so different for him because he's never really done a biopic before. And yet I think with everything that he's done in the past and everything that he's learned, like, he's able to pull everything together to make what is essentially his biggest masterpiece today. which is Oppenheimer. I mean, this is a film that, again, it's because of biopic nature, his biographical nature, that, it could have been just about any sort of normal, ordinary biographical movie about a specific figure, right? It could have gone any way in that. He could have gone in the most, cliche, ordinary way of making this film, but he didn't. What makes this film so spectacular is that every moment in this movie, there's no dull moment. There is no dull moment in terms of understanding what's going on in the storytelling. At one moment we're understanding who Oppenheimer is as a person, how his politics is, how his ideas about his viewpoint of it. Then we see his more scientific side, how he's very, in love with understanding the theories of, theoretical physics, I believe. Yeah, theoretical physics, because he's a theoretical physicist. And then this whole idea of trying to create a bomb that could end the wars, right? But it doesn't end there, right? We start to understand what's happening beyond that. So his whole hearing about his security clearances. Then we see this whole, I believe it was Louis Strauss's Senate hearing to be, I believe it was like going into Eisenhower's cabinet or to join Eisenhower's cabinet. So that was another whole thing right there. But with everything that happens, I mean, there's so many different separate stories that are kind of like the subplot. They all come together to really show this deeper meaning behind the legacy of who J. Robert Oppenheimer is. And the more you start to really understand what's going on, the more you're just glued into the storytelling of, wow, like this is who Oppenheimer is. Like, I mean, this is a guy who's really revered in history because of his involvement in the makings of the atomic bomb. But also we can see how, as a result of that, it has definitely led to the dark aftermath of nuclear war. And I mean, that ending right there where we get to see John and his encounter with Albert Einstein and what really happened in that moment, because again, the whole idea of why Strauss went through all this trouble just to kick Oppenheimer out because he thought that, he was talking about him, which was like never really the case. I have to say, like, that's some great storytelling right there, just to see some guy like Strauss who's so narcissistic about this, where he thinks that everyone's talking about him when like he's far from the center of this world, where in actuality, the story is about, how basically the result and the ideas and the decision making of making the atomic bomb has basically led to kind of this long-term problems that are going to come in the future, and how this could basically, spell the end of the world as a result of nuclear war, right? And again, I have to say, like, this is spectacular storytelling, just to getting to the ending, realizing the true meaning of what we're seeing here in terms of Oppenheimer's story and his viewpoint, and how this is actually a much darker time and moment for the figure, and seeing what he's going through. I mean, I have to say, it's spectacular. And he did so in the way that is very non-linear in the storytelling. And it's non-linear storytelling. And again, I think because of this linear structure, that it really allows a story to kind of just work. Like, again, there's a reason why there is no dull moment, because of the fact that it's so non-linear storytelling, this narrative, and it's just so spectacular. And again, the Trinity test scene is so, I mean, I have to say, I remember watching this in IMAX, and everyone in the room was so dead silent. There was not like anybody, like, I mean, I have to say, like, just to hear just a pin drop of that room in that moment, spectacular. I mean, again, the visuals are great, the cinematography is spectacular, the performances in the movie is, I mean, I have to say, it's out of this world. I mean, there's one moment that I really love, which is the kitty scene, where she is being interrogated by the head, investigator, and just her just kind of having this badass moment where she really kind of like calls him out for the way that he's questioning her, and how her speaking is, how his English is not proper in any way. I mean, it was such an incredible moment right there. I mean, there's some really great scenes. Again, I feel like Emily Blunt is definitely up there for Best Supporting Actress. Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer, I mean, he is the star. He's a star of this. I mean, he's been in so many Nolan movies in the past, but this is the first time he actually got to play a leading character in any of his films, and he absolutely was the best part of this movie, without a doubt. Like, I mean, I'm saying this to this day, like, he is basically the front runner to win Best Actor, I think. And as I said just earlier, I think if there's anyone who would be a great challenge, or be a challenger to him, it's going to be Paul Giamatti. But aside from that, I think Cillian Murphy I think he's the one who's locked to win it. I think he's the one who has the best chance of winning it. We'll see when we start getting down into award season, but he's my pick so far with that, of course. And again, I mean, this is truly Nolan's best piece so far in history. I mean, this is the most perfect movie that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, everything, like, I don't think there's really anything that I can really draw into, like, of any flaws, except for, like, some, going to nitpicking out of it. But aside from that, I mean, this could be the one that could really be a big one for him going to Oscar season. And not just that, but I think it is honestly one of it's not one of the best movies ever that I've seen, but also the best movie of 2023 without a doubt. So yeah, that's it right there for my top 10 movies of 2023. Let me know what your thoughts are having seen my list. Do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? What are some of your top 10 movies of this year? Because I mean, I'm very interested. I'm very intrigued to hear what you guys have to say about some of the movies that you've seen so far. And maybe, giving us a little bit of Oscar predictions going to, 2024. And let me know what are some of the films that you're also looking forward to going into 2024. Let me know your comments down below and make sure to like and subscribe.